All right, I think perhaps we can start. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming down to this session, Tune Up Your Kafka Tooling with Kapow. This is a tools in action session, and it's a short one. It's 30 minutes. It's going to be slightly less cerebral, perhaps, than some of the talks you've seen today, and a little bit more practical. My name's Derek Troy West. I'm the CEO at Factor House. We make Kapow, and my goal today is to demonstrate to you just how easy it is to get started with the Kpow Community Edition, which is our free Kafka tooling product, and show you some of the general capabilities of the tooling, and then dive into some use cases that we've found with our customers that have been pretty useful in the past. So hopefully you take something valuable out of this, even if it's just that you can spin up Community Edition in a one-liner in Docker and have a play with it and experiment yourself in your own Kafka environment. So just a little quick bit about who we are at Factor House. We're independent, bootstrapped, and a profitable company, which this year turns out to be a bit more important than it has been in the last 5 years or so. We are distributed systems experts, so the tooling that we build comes from our experience trying to build platforms with Kafka, Storm, Cassandra, and so on, and our experiences in that space. And we make systems for distributed systems engineers to make their lives easier. So the focus of what we build is really from the engineering perspective. And so the main tool that we make is Kapow for Apache Kafka. And next week at the Kafka Summit, we're announcing Kapow for Apache Flink. So if you use Flink, you can imagine very similar tooling and community edition to what you see today for Kafka, but that's top secret because we're not announcing that till next week. So a little bit of background about Kapow. We've been in development for 5 years and in production for 4 years, and we have a very low profile because we don't spend any money on sales and marketing. We've pushed 100 releases, and we've got users in over 100 countries, and over 500,000 Docker pulls at this point. And we're not a SaaS product, so that's something really important to know about Kapow. It's just a single Docker container, or a Java jar file if you require that. And the Kpow Community Edition is free, as in beer, so it's not open source, but you can use it, and you can use it in commercial environments, and you can even use it as an organization as well. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is to get started with our tooling. And in fact, I might actually just do that first. So I'm just going to drop to a command prompt and show you the Docker run command, which is like for ants up there, but it's a one-liner with very little configuration. That's just saying always pull the Kpow CE latest container, run that, and bind it to port 3000 because Kapow starts a full web UI. We can see a little bit of logging in there, a little bit of ASCII art. And then if I switch into a browser and I look on localhost on port 3000, without any configuration at all, I've just got a wizard that's going to take me through configuring a Kafka cluster, a Schema Registry, a Connect cluster, and then we launch. And that's what you can manage with Kpow Community Edition, one of each. Kapow connects with just the same configuration as you use with your normal Java APIs, consumers, producers. Doesn't need anything special at all. Doesn't use JMX because we have some secret sauce in how the product is built. So it's very easy to get started in an environment that's Dockerized just by running a container like that, plugging in your configuration if you want to get up and running quickly. You can, of course, also run it with some configuration. So I've got a Confluent Cloud environment file here, which is really just some environment variables that say the bootstrap is this and my schema registry is that. I would show it to you, but then it would mean I'd need to roll all of my resources that we use in a dev environment, so I'd really rather not. And so in that case, Kapow is going to skip the wizard. It's going to accept all of the resources that you have configured, and it's going to start observing those resources, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. So what we're going to step through today, we're going to have a quick look at the features overview of Kapow, and I'll tell you a little bit about how it's built because it's quite unusual. And then I've got 4 things that you can do with the Kpow Community Edition that really help accelerate development, but also help reduce that time to resolution of production issues when you're looking for things that are going wrong with Kafka, of which there are many things. And then if I have time at the end, I might tell you a little bit about some of the commercial features of Kapow, but we'll just see how we go. So that's what we're going to talk about now. If I go back to my localhost, we can see that Kapow is actually connected to this Confluent Cloud cluster. It hasn't generated much telemetry yet, so all the charts and everything are empty. But we can dive into some details and sort of peek under the covers of Confluent Cloud. We can see that there are actually 28 or 27 brokers in this Confluent Cloud cluster. And we can see some breakdown of topic and broker disk, I think, in here somewhere, and some very little amount of consumption. There's not actually much going on in this Kafka cluster, but that's just to demonstrate how quickly you can get up and running. There's not much friction there with getting started with Kapow. I'm actually going to not look at that environment specifically because it's terribly boring. I'm going to look at our live demo environment. So if you go to our website, click on live demo, it's a similar thing, but this is a cluster that's set up with lots of interesting stuff going on that I can talk about. So the way that Kapow works is it isn't a SaaS product. It runs completely air-gapped. It's been tuned to be very performant. So a normal setup for us would be a customer using Kapow with maybe a dozen Kafka clusters and associated Schema Connect and KSQLDB resources. So you get the benefit when you're working with Kpow Community that you're working with a product that has been tuned for enterprise installations, and it's generally very performant. So you can expect to get a good experience out of it. When you first look at Kapow, you get an overview of what's happening in this particular Kafka cluster. This is really just sort of a drop-in because everybody's workloads are different with Kafka. You as the engineer that's working with these clusters have an expectation of what's normal for you. So this overview page gives you something that you can look at that just highlights immediately that maybe something's going wrong for the day and that you should investigate that. And then from there, we have the capabilities to really dive down into the details. So Kapow doesn't use JMX telemetry. We compute all of our own, which is a little bit unusual. For interest, Kapow's built the front and back end in Clojure, so it's a very data-oriented application, and you'll sort of see some of that coming through in the user interface. We take observations of all of your resources, and we every minute, and then we compute our own snapshots and telemetry of those that we show to you in the user interface. What that means is we can give you all sorts of dimensions and insights that normal tooling can't or doesn't, because if you're using JMX telemetry, you're very much constrained to a broker-specific view because that's where the JMX metrics comes from. We're sort of freed from that, so we do a lot more. In the general case, we have charting and telemetry of the physical distribution of data. So this is the brokers and the work that they're doing, the reads and writes. You can very quickly see if your brokers are balanced, because that might be something that's problematic for you. These are catastrophically unbalanced brokers in this environment, but it's because it's one of our dev environments, and we had a 2-cluster broker and we upgraded it to 4. But it gives you a bit of a view into that. Our UI follows a very similar pattern throughout in that because we work with teams who are completely new to Apache Kafka all the way through to teams who have been working with Kafka for a long, long time, we try and raise up some visuals straight away that give some insight into Kafka basics and Kafka principles. And then as you tab through, you'll get to the point where you can see all of the details. So in this case, we can tell that the controller broker is broker number 4. We can see the distribution of different topics as they're split across the brokers, and so on. We actually have some disk insights. For this particular cluster, it's below Kafka version 3.30, so we can't actually tell you when you're going to run out of disk. But if you're on a slightly more modern version of Kafka brokers, we'll tell you what your remaining disk is, so you can see when you're starting to run low on that. We have all of the things you'd expect in terms of configuration. You can come in and look at configuration for particular fields. You can edit them. We always include the documentation in all of this because I can never remember what the documentation is, so it's very useful to have that. We have a breakdown of ACLs and CRUD operations on those if you use ACLs in your Kafka cluster. We have insights into the logical distribution of data, so your topics, which is probably the most common thing to look at in terms of how your data is operating in your Kafka clusters. Again, we start with sort of a visual overview. We have all of the details. You can filter into, individual topic or topics and see what's happening with those right down to a topic partition level. And you can compare them in the visuals for the charting as well. Again, we've got the configuration, ACLs, inspect and produce I'll come back to because it's pretty special. It's probably the most commonly used feature of Kapow, finding the needle in a haystack, which is our first use case that we're going to look at. We've got heaps of insights into consumption coming out of your Kafka cluster, and this is where building our own telemetry and breaking free of the broker-specific stuff really gives us lots of advantages because we can show you classic things about consumption at an individual consumer group level. If we look at the details of consumers here, I can pick one, and we can see the group and group members and group member assignments and individual offsets that have been consumed up to and lag, things that are useful always. But we reconstitute this consumption information into multiple dimensions. So, for instance, we can show you the network consumption aggregated by the network addressable host that's serving consumer groups. So in this case, these might be Kubernetes nodes perhaps, or on-prem individual boxes that are running workloads for you. It might be if you're running a production system and you've got some strange lag characteristics that it's actually the physical machine that's running your consumption that's laboring, and that's causing issues with your production workloads. And again, we've got topic dimensions, so you can look at the consumption and lag and throughputs of individual topics, and even brokers. So we aggregate all the consumption information by broker. So you can see if for some reason perhaps your topic leadership has distributed into a way that an individual broker is doing a lot more work than other brokers within your cluster, which would be suboptimal. So you've got real great multi-dimensional insight into your consumption within your cluster. And then we have our consumption topology viewer. So this is a live topology of an individual consumer. And the thing that's really useful here for engineers that you can use in our Community Edition is you can manage your offsets here at any point. So for the entire consumer group, you can reset your offsets to the earliest. If you wanted to completely reconsume, you could choose to reset offsets just based on the host that's serving that consumption, which would be a little bit odd, or an individual member, or a member assignment to a topic, or probably more commonly, if you have if you've serialized a message incorrectly and you've effectively got a poison pill message which is blocking consumption on an individual topic, then topic partition, you can come in here and choose to skip an offset. At which point Kapow is going to what we call schedule a mutation for that to happen at some point in the future, because Kapow can't affect that change to your consumer groups until you have while the group is running. So, and we don't orchestrate your consumption for you. So at this point, after making that request, you have to go away into whatever system orchestrates your consumption and restart your consumer group. And Kapow is sitting there waiting for that to occur. It's keeping an eye on the state of that consumer group. So once that consumer group has paused or stopped, Kapow will reset your offsets, and then as it restarts, it'll come up consuming from the point that you want it to. So you've got really fine-grained control over consumption, which is very, very useful. Within Kpow Community, we offer a full interface for Kafka Connect as well. So, and it's also support Confluent Managed Connect and MSK Managed Connect. So if you're working with workloads where you're configuring connectors to import and export data from Kafka, you can use Kpow to manage and monitor those workloads and even get some real insight into how they're operating. So you can come and see the stack trace for a task that's failing. You can restart tasks. You can restart connectors. You can even create entirely new connectors as well. So great control over your connect resources. Our integrations with Schema Registry, we support Confluent Schema Registry and AWS Glue. So in our Community Edition, you can come in, take all of the actions on schemas that you would expect to be able to do, right down to seeing a diff in your schemas if you're curious about the things that have changed through time. We've got a visual diff for that. You can edit the configuration of those schemas and change the compatibility to backwards and forwards, which is something that teams often do when they're progressing through environments from dev to staging to production. Lock down those compatibility to be more strict. And all of that schema registry integration is bound into our data inspect capabilities, which is probably the most commonly used feature of Kapow. So we have a very fully featured, very fast and performant multi-topic search with built-in JSON queries. So if you're familiar with JQ, the language, we've implemented a subset of JQ in Clojure that is available in the browser. You'll see the IntelliSense and so forth. And then that predicate, which can be quite complex, is compiled and executed on the back end so that you can filter data very, very quickly. So I'll just give you a little demonstration of how that works. So we've got in Kapow, in our demo environment, we've got about 200 topics that are filled with generative data constantly, which we call transaction topics. So I can choose one of those. It's detected the deserializer there. And if I just click search, then Kapow's going to go away and get the 100 most recent messages from that topic and show them to me, which is really useful. I can then choose one of those messages. If I'm looking for this particular message, for instance, I'm looking for whether value ID equals a certain field. That's just a very simple JQ predicate that I can type in here. Whoops, I've got too many quotation marks. And I can shift enter and run that again. And that's going to filter to that message on a topic very, very quickly. In our commercial product, we support data masking and so on as well, so and role-based access controls, so you can limit the capabilities of users to specific topics and mask data, which might be of interest. The powerful thing about Kapow is that I can do a multi-topic search just as quickly, searching for that same information. And I can do really complex compound predicates. So I'm actually going to change this to say I'm looking for something with a value. What shall I look for? The value trade price equals. I'll build up a bit of a query. Start with something that works. 41.90. So I can actually, the price field in there is a string, but I can use JQ to convert that to a double and say that's greater than 41.90. So that's going to find more records there. I actually need to say, give it a window. So I'm going to build a little compound query here that says I'm within a range of values for a particular field that has been converted from a string to a double. And I'm going to say I've got what else do I have in here that I can use? I'll say the value trade currency equals GBP because we're in the UK. See that I've got a fairly small number of records. I've got 16. Actually, that's not so bad. 16 out of 100. That's quite a large hit, so I'll reduce that to like so. So you get the idea that you can build quite complex compound queries using a language that you know already to inspect data on topics. And in this particular environment, I've got 200 TX topics, and I can search all of them effectively by giving a regex pattern. I'll close down these previous queries that I did. And I can search 200 topics all at the same time with a fairly complex compound query. Kpow will stop when it gets to 100 records by default. I can tell it continue consuming. And it will exhaust all of those topics. We haven't searched too many messages there. We've only searched 2,400 because must have 240 topics perhaps. But we can search hundreds of thousands of messages off multiple topics in pretty short amounts of time, which is a very common thing that you might want to do if you're looking for a production issue, because everybody puts data into Kafka and then has problems with the lack of visibility of understanding whether messages are in the right place at the right time to trigger jobs or workflows that are executing. And then as an extension of that, we have something called the kREPL, which is completely mad. It blends JQ, the language, with Clojure and gives you the ability to programmatically query for data in the same way that we were just using our data inspect engine for, but then to end with the results in a REPL format, if you're familiar with Lispy type languages or languages that have a REPL, so that you can then continue to query or make realizations about that data, which might be really important to you because in your particular workflow that's happening in your Kafka clusters, you might have an issue that's happening in an environment that relates to the nature of the data that's happening. And really, you just want to make an ad hoc query to investigate what's going on. And this is a really difficult thing to do at the moment without a tool like Kapow. You have to sort of extricate that information into a workpad or something that you can play with. With Kapow, we can just tell it to take a look at a particular topic, and we give it the surdays. We'll say it's a string for the key and transit JSON for the data. And we can execute that. By default, it's going to pull those 100 most recent messages off that topic, show them to me here. And now I can use either JQ or Clojure if I'm familiar with either language. So I'll use both. I can reference the previous result set that was passed into this REPL, executing that consumption. I can run through all of those one by one, and I can pull out something like the value partner network, which is an individual field within all of those results. And I can have a look at what that was for each result that came back. And then I can use one of the 150 pure Clojure functions that are included within the kREPL to say, show me the frequencies of that. So I can make some realization about the data that's on the topic, which when you're trying to resolve a production issue might be something that adds real value. There is a little bit of learning to do here, but effectively you're learning Clojure and JQ, which are both quite established languages for manipulating and exploring structured data. So there's value in that as well. There's a guide here that demonstrates how to access that kREPL and how to use it. So we've covered basically a broad overview of all of the features that are available in the Kpow Community Edition. You get started with tomorrow, so you can realize all of that value in your own Kafka environments. There's just one thing that I would like to add, since I have a couple of minutes left. I'll look in our dev environment, which is a slightly different environment in that it actually has authentication and authorization enabled, and I'm logged in. I'd already logged in previously, so I'm logged in as Tom, who's my colleague, and we have SAML AWS SSO integrated. And the reason I like to demonstrate this feature is because we support a concept of multi-tenancy, which is really quite sophisticated. So you can dictate to your users that are accessing the system that they can only see a subset of the resources that are available within that Kafka cluster. So you can effectively say to users, you can only see 5 or 6 of the 100 so topics that are available in the cluster. And we build completely internally consistent materialized views of these sort of virtual clusters for you. So this is the same Kafka cluster that I'm looking at. It's the MSK cluster. But when I look at it, in this case, it's got completely different characteristics. I'm looking at this Kafka cluster through a lens of a tenancy that restricts it to just a limited number of topics and consumer groups and connect resources. So this is something that can be really valuable just to reduce the scope of what's available in Kafka sometimes. This was requested by one of our larger enterprise customers who just said that Kafka was a bit too confusing for the teams that were logging in because they're seeing hundreds of topics and hundreds of groups and getting a bit bewildered. So that's an optimization that you can use to manage that with your teams as well. So there's only a couple of minutes left. I hope you've found this Tools in Action talk useful, and we're a small independent team. If you've got any feedback or you need any help with the product, just let us know.